Okay, we're going to have a look, oh golly, at how we complete our zipper placket. So you've already made your long zipper placket. We now need to do these side panels, and you'll have 2 of these. And if you're making your bag in fabric, then you would use, you can choose to use the lining fabric or the exterior fabric. They are slightly visible, not ever so visible, but slightly visible. Because I'm using faux leather for the outside and for the top facing parts, I'm going to use the same faux leather for the sides of my zipper placket. So I've cut mine to size, and you will need to check the pattern to make sure that you have the right size. And I'm going to fold them in half along the length, right sides together. And I'm just going to clip them because this is faux leather and it doesn't sort of fold easily. If you're using fabric, then you can press them, which will make it a lot easier. And I'm going to stitch down the short ends using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and it's really important that you get these seam allowances perfectly spot on, and you'll see why in a minute. Oh, let's turn my stitch length down. Back stitched a couple of stitches just to make sure that that stays secure. So now, and for those of you wondering, yes, I have got a thing on my scissors, because that means nobody uses them, because they know that they're mine and that I will be angry if they do. So now I've stitched down, well, you can't see it because it's black on black, but I've stitched a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both ends. On the end where the fold is, I'm just going to trim off the seam allowance at 45 degrees. So taking away the corners, making sure I don't cut into my stitching. I'm just going to remove those clips. And I'm going to turn that right sides out. Poke out those corners. And again, I'm just going to clip those raw edges so that they're sitting together. If you're using fabric, you can press this and it will stay where it is. Using faux leather makes it more of a challenge because it's a bit thicker. I like a challenge. So now we have a sort of a long rectangle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to top stitch down both of these short ends using my top stitch length, which is about 3.5. Then I'm going to baste stitch to close that open side, just to make sure it stays where it's meant to be. So I'm going to start my top stitching with my stitch length at about 3.5, and when I get to 1/8 of an inch from that open edge, I'm going to increase my stitch length to my basting stitch. To be honest, it doesn't matter if you don't, it's fine, but I like to do it because we are basting this rather than stitching it. When I get to the other end and I'm going to pivot, I'm going to go back to my shorter stitch length and just do one back stitch at the end. Now, because I'm using faux leather, the side where my fold is actually quite bulky because it doesn't sit flat because it's faux leather. So I am actually going to base stitch down that as well, just to hold it nice and flat. If you're using fabric, you shouldn't need to, because you can press it, but this just stops it from being a bit bulky. So now what I have is a nice rectangle with threads all over the place of fabric. And that rectangle should fit perfectly within your aperture that you've made at the side of your zipper placket. The name has completely eluded me. Now I'm just looking at these and looking at this, and actually I've cut these too short, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to go and cut myself 2 more and have another go at that because they're just way too short. I will be back shortly with the correct ones. Okay, crisis averted, redone. So I now have my 2 side pieces for my zipper placket, and you can see here that I've folded in half and marked the centre of my zipper placket. I've marked the centre of both of these pieces, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the side of the zipper placket. That's why we didn't stitch down the side of the zipper placket. I'm going to position those side pieces between the 2 pieces, the front and the back. And I'm going to use a ruler because I need to push them in far enough that we only have ½ an inch hanging out of the side. So it does take a little bit of doing. Let's just find a part of my ruler that's actually easier to read. Okay, so that's fine on that one. If you can use some clips to hold it in place if you want to, or you can do as I'm going to do, just double check that I haven't just moved that as I've done it. I am going to just pop a clip in either end just to make sure that it stays where I want it to be. And I'm going to then top stitch all the way down and across that panel to hold it in place. I'm going to start my stitching at the same stitch hole that I finished my last stitch. I've got long threads on the top and the bottom, and I'm just going to make sure that my stitch length is the same. Stitch now. For the smaller bag, you'll find that the aperture that the side panel that you've got, the hole that you've got left at the side, is actually a fairly snug fit for this. For the larger bag, there's a little more wiggle room. It's just a bigger bag. But I'm stitching on the zipper placket using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance in exactly the same way as we did previously, and this will go through all of the layers. And this is what gives the look that the zipper placket's almost floating on the top of your bag. And try and finish in the same hole as you finished your last stitching on the other side. So when you did that stitching around the curve, your stitching will just look like a continuous line, and then you're going to bury and tie off those threads in exactly the same way as we've been doing with all of the others. You see, even I cut things wrong sometimes. We all do it. It's human. We are human and we make mistakes. I usually double check everything, but clearly I hadn't done today. I'm just grateful that I had some of the faux leather left, otherwise I'd have looked really silly. But hey ho. So on the wrong side, we're just gonna do that from this angle. I'm just gonna tie off those threads in exactly the same way as we did before. Trim off. And just add a little bit of glue just to kind of stop them going anywhere. I'm not going to do the other one just in a minute. I'm going to pop this one in and we'll do the same thing again. So matching up the centre marks. Let's turn it around. Now, I think the pattern tells you to put the folded edge in first. To be really fair, it actually doesn't matter because neither edge will show on the finished article. Let's just push that in just a touch further. Let's use my so you need 1/2 inch to be showing. On the outside. And then I'm going to top stitch all the way down from the end of my stitching to the end of my stitching, covering that whole side zipper panel. I'm sure you need to see me do that. I suppose you could do. I can do that. Let's do it. We're just doing the same thing again as we've already done. Dropping my needle in where my last stitch was. Long threads at the beginning and the end again to bury our threads. For those of you that have come from a quilting background, burying threads will seem quite normal. For those of you that are new to bags by bags of style sew alongs, it might seem a bit alien because not everybody does it. For those of you that have been with me for a while, you know the drill. Raise my needle. And bury those threads. And your zipper placket is now completed. And the next thing we're going to do is start to construct our lining, which will have our zipper placket as part of the integral build of it. Normally bags have all of the exterior stuff done at one point and all the lining stuff, and then we join the two together. This one doesn't work that way. Our lining, our zipper placket, which is part of the exterior, actually becomes almost effectively part of our lining. Does anybody keep all these little bits of thread that we cut off? I've used threads when I've been weaving before now. I used to keep them all in a little pot and use them when I was weaving. You can also put them between two pieces of soluble stabilizer, the stuff that they use in embroidery. And if you then stitch all over it, if you put sandwich it between two pieces of layers of this soluble stabilizer, and then literally stitch all over it, preferably free motion stitching all over it in a really random fashion, and then place the soluble stuff in water, what you've actually create is fabric. It's not hugely stable, but it's quite nice for decorating things. Just interesting. I've got a thread there that needs to be stuck down and isn't. And there we have one completed zipper placket. I haven't got my cardigan on, so I can't use my cardie to get rid of my chalk marks. So I'll just a little bit of the lick. And there she is. So I'll come back to you and we'll look at how we construct our lining.